The forgotten handshake, the cold breeze blew through the narrow street of Chennai as the sun struggled to pierce through the heavy gray clouds. It was a Tuesday morning, but for Sundar, it felt like the kind of day when time moved slower than usual. The kind of day that whispered memories into your ear and made you question how far you'd really come. Sundar stood by the roadside tea stall, sipping a paper cup of steaming masala chai, his mind far from Silicon Valley. He was not the CEO of a tech empire today, not here, not now. He was just a man revisiting a part of himself long buried under years of success, pressure, and responsibility dot as he looked across the street. He saw a crumbling building with flaking paint and rusted signs. It used to be the headquarters of a mid-tier electronics firm named Bharat Systems. 30 years ago, Sundar had stood in front of that building, holding his worn-out resume with trembling fingers, wearing the only white shirt he owned. Then he was just another graduate with big dreams and empty pockets. He remembered it vividly. The metal gate had screeched as he pushed it open, and the security guard had looked him up and down like he didn't belong. Inside, he had met a man who would shape his fate in ways neither of them could have imagined. The man's name was Manoj, Pradhan. OJ was tall, charismatic, and commanded respect the moment he entered the room. He had a sharp voice and an even sharper tongue. He was the lead recruiter at Bharat Systems and had a reputation for being brutally honest. Sundar had waited outside his cabin for almost an hour, his shirt soaked in sweat, his resume wrinkled from being held too tightly. When Manoj finally called him in, Sundar walked with nervous steps, trying to hide the fear bubbling inside him. He needed that job. His family needed him to get that job. And he had believed with all his heart that he could prove himself. Manoj didn't look up from his desk at first. He flipped through Sundar's resume like it was a menu. Then, with a bored sigh, he finally looked him in the eye. "You studied metallurgical engineering?" he asked, his tone flat. "Yes, sir," Sundar replied. "This is an electronics firm." "I know, sir. But I have been learning." "Stop." The word hit Sundar like a slap. Manoj leaned back in his chair. "Listen, kid. You're smart. I can see that. But this isn't your place. We don't have the time or budget to train someone who's not a fit. Go try for TCS or Infosys. They'll train you. We don't." Sundar's heart sank. He opened his mouth to plead, but Manoj had already looked away. "Thank you for coming." "Best of luck," Manoj said without emotion. Sundar had walked out of that office broken. Not because of the rejection, but because of how easily he had been. Dismissed. Not even a chance. No test. No second question. Just a wave of the hand. Outside, he had leaned against the wall and looked up at the sky, fighting back tears. He told himself he would not break. Not there. Not in front of those people. But inside, a fire had started burning. A fire that would fuel him for decades. Back. In the present day, Sundar sipped the last of his tea. He had come back to India for a global conference, but this morning he had asked his driver to take a detour. He wanted to walk through the past, to remember who he used to be. He crossed the road and stepped in front of the same building. The gate had been replaced, but the office sign still read Bharat Systems PVT Limited in faded letters. A few younger employees walked in, barely noticing the quiet man in jeans and a hoodie standing by the wall. He was about to leave when he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, ... Are you Sundar Pichai?" He turned slowly. The man who spoke looked older, with thinning hair, a slight hunch, and tired eyes. He wore an outdated button-down shirt and held a folder in one hand. Sundar's eyes widened. It was Manoj, but not the Manoj he remembered. Gone was the powerful recruiter with fire in his eyes. In his place stood a man who looked like life had beaten him down. His clothes were faded and his expression unsure. It took a second for Manoj to recognize him too. His mouth opened slightly in shock. "Sundar?" he whispered, his voice dry. Sundar gave a small nod, and an awkward silence settled between them. The past stood between them like a wall. Manoj's hands trembled. "You ... You came back. Sundar smiled softly. I did. Manoj looked around, almost embarrassed. You probably don't remember, but years ago, you interviewed here. I remember everything, Sundar said gently. Words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Manoj looked down, the weight of his past decisions showing in the wrinkles on his face. Sundar could see it, the regret, the guilt, the unspoken apology in his eyes. I didn't know you'd go so far, Manoj said quietly. I just did what I thought was best. Sundar nodded. I know. Another silence passed before Manoj looked up, forcing a smile. So, what brings you back? Just visiting, Sundar replied. Needed to remember where it all started. This place hasn't changed much, Manoj said, his voice cracking slightly. But I have. I left Burrit Systems years ago. Things didn't go as planned. I'm doing small consultancy work now. Trying to stay afloat. Something shifted in Sundar's heart. Here was the man who once told him no. The man who had turned him away with a single word. And now he stood before him, worn and unsure, holding a folder like a job seeker himself. And Sundar didn't feel anger. He felt something. Deeper understanding because he knew that life was never a straight road. One decision didn't define a person, but how they faced their journey did. Before Manoj could say anything else, Sundar reached into his pocket and pulled out a card. I'm flying back tomorrow. But if you ever feel like talking or working on something new, call. Nah. Manoj stared at the card. His hands shook as he took it. The Google logo printed in silver across the bottom gleamed under the sun. I don't know what to say. He whispered. Say yes, when the time feels right, Sundar replied. Dahi turned and walked away, leaving Manoj frozen on the steps, staring at the card like it was a second chance he never thought he'd get. But Sundar didn't look back. He had lived long enough to know that sometimes the best way to rewrite the past was to offer someone else a future. And somewhere deep in his heart, he knew this story was only beginning. Asterisk the silent phone call the next morning. As the city stirred awake under the golden light of dawn, Manoj sat alone in his one-bedroom apartment, staring at the card Sundar had handed him. It lay on the wooden dining table, its clean white surface almost glowing, as if it carried something more than just a name and number. He had placed it there carefully the night before, like it was something sacred. He hadn't slept much. His mind had been a storm of memories, doubts, shame, and an emotion he hadn't felt in years. He reached for his cup of black tea, now cold, and took a bitter sip. In the quiet hum of the room, he could hear the echo of his past. Sundar's voice had lingered all night in his ears. Say yes, when the time feels right. But what did that even mean now? Did he really have a place in Sundar's world? In that dazzling world of innovation, speed, and brilliance? Manoj looked around his apartment. The faded curtains, the flickering tube light, the stack of bills by the corner. His old desktop computer, still running on outdated software. He had once been respected. Once led hiring teams across the country. He had hired hundreds, mentored dozens, and made decisions with confidence. But over the years, everything had slipped. First, it was the reorganization that pushed him to a smaller team. Then came the budget cuts, the younger hires replacing veterans like him, and finally the day his name was no longer on the internal roster. His career hadn't ended. It had simply disappeared, slowly, painfully. Like sand slipping through fingers, Dahi picked up the card, ran his thumb across the embossed name, Sundar Pichai. He still remembered that day. 3 decades ago, when he had dismissed Sundar in a matter of minutes. He hadn't meant to be cruel, but the industry was ruthless then. He had believed he was doing the right thing, saving the company time, preserving resources. But now he wondered what might have changed if he had taken 5 more minutes that day. 5 minutes to ask the right questions. 5 minutes to believe in someone who didn't fit neatly into a box. His fingers trembled as he reached for his phone. He entered the number on the card, but didn't press call. Instead, he just stared at it, What would he say? Hello, remember me? I'm the man who once told you you weren't good enough. Now I need your help. He couldn't. The shame was too heavy. He set the phone down and stood up, pacing the room. Outside, the city honked and rattled like it always had. But inside his apartment, it felt like the whole world had paused. He thought about his daughter, Neha, studying economics at a local college, taking up part-time jobs to support the household. She had always looked up to him, even when things got hard. But lately, he had caught that flicker of worry in her eyes, the silent question she didn't want to ask. Are we going to be okay, Papa? He couldn't lie to her anymore. They weren't okay. And this card on the table might be the only light left. Across the ocean, Sundar was back in California, in his quiet office at Google's headquarters. The world outside was buzzing with launches, deadlines, and meetings. But inside, Sundar sat by the window, thinking about Manoj. He couldn't shake. The image of the man's trembling hands, the defeated look in his eyes. Sundar knew that look. He had seen it in his own father's face once, when they couldn't afford to fix the refrigerator and had to live with spoiled food for weeks. He had seen it in his own reflection when he was rejected by universities, jobs, and investors in his early days. He knew how hard it was to fall, but he also knew the strength it took to rise again. He had left Manoj with an open door, but he didn't expect him to walk through it easily. Pride, guilt, and fear were powerful chains. They could keep even the strongest people trapped in their own silence. His phone buzzed. It wasn't a call, just a message. A photo from his assistant. It was a forwarded picture taken by a young employee in Chennai. It showed Sundar standing outside the Barrett Systems building, talking to a man. The caption read, CEO of Google spotted chatting with former Barrett recruiter. Local buzz says they have history. The internet was already spinning stories. Some people remembered Sundar's early job rejections. Others tried to dig into who the man was. Sundar sighed. He hated when the past was twisted into gossip. The truth was never that simple. Manoj wasn't the villain. He was just a man who had made a decision in a system that didn't leave much room for compassion. He drafted a quick reply to his assistant. Find out how I can reach Mr. Manoj Pradhan. Quietly. The next day, Manoj went to meet a client for a freelance project. A small textile shop wanted to digitize its records, and Manoj had promised to help them build a simple spreadsheet system. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid. After 2 hours of explaining how to use basic formulas and setting up inventory templates, he sat outside the shop on a bench, exhausted. That's when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number, but something inside him told him to, hello? He said, cautiously, Mr. Pradhan, this is Maya. I work with Mr. Sundar Pichai. Manoj's heart skipped. Yes, I remember. He wanted me to reach out. He's heading a private initiative focused on mentoring and including industry veterans into next-gen projects. He specifically mentioned your name. Manoj couldn't breathe for a second. He looked around, unsure if he was dreaming. He mentioned me? Yes, Maya said. He would like to meet with you. We'll arrange everything. He believes your insight could be invaluable. Manoj didn't reply. His throat had tightened. He felt the weight of years lifting slowly, like clouds parting after a long storm. Maya continued, we can book your ticket for Monday. Would you be open to visiting our California campus? Manoj stared ahead at the narrow street, the kids playing cricket beside parked scooters, the honking of cars, and the small crowd of people living lives they never imagined would change. He closed his eyes. Yes, he whispered back in California. Sundar received the confirmation. He didn't smile with satisfaction. He didn't feel triumphant. Instead, he felt something deeper, like something broken had just begun to heal. A few days later, the private jet waited on a silent runway in Chennai. Manoj stood beside it, wearing a new blazer Neha had insisted he buy. She had cried when he told her where he was going, not because of fear, but because of pride. For the first time in years, her father stood tall again. As the engines roared to life and the stairs folded in, Manoj looked out the small window. watching Chennai disappear beneath the clouds. Somewhere inside that cloud, he felt himself rise to dot, but he didn't know yet what awaited him on the other side. He didn't know that Sundar wasn't just offering him a job. He was about to offer him redemption dot and maybe a new beginning. Asterisk flight into the unknown jet soared above the clouds, slicing through the sky like a silver arrow. Inside the cabin, wrapped in silence and soft leather, Manoj Pradhan sat stiffly, his fingers nervously interlaced on his lap. The world outside the window was white and endless, a sky without borders. But the world inside Manoj's chest was a hurricane of emotions. He hadn't flown in years, certainly not like this. The last time he boarded a plane was for a budget business trip where his knees barely fit the cramped space. Now, a private flight had been chartered with his name on the manifest. It didn't feel real. It felt like he had somehow stepped into someone else's life. His daughter Neha had hugged him at the airport and whispered, "Papa, this is your moment. Just be you." And then, through tears, she had slipped a folded paper into his hand. He hadn't opened it yet. He didn't know if he could. Even looking at it made his throat tighten. The flight attendant offered him another drink, but he declined. Instead, he kept staring at the folder in his lap, which contained nothing more than his resume updated for the first time in 7 years. As he flipped through it again, and again, he couldn't help but notice how thin it had become. Where once he had listed titles, leadership roles, project completions, and national seminars, now it simply said consultant freelance systems support. The truth stared back at him in ink. He was no longer the man he used to be. But then again, maybe that was the point. The jet touched down at San Jose just after sunset. The California skyline stretched in the distance like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. A black car was waiting for him on the tarmac, and a young driver with a warm smile greeted him by name. Manoj offered a stiff nod, still unsure if he was being welcomed or studied. As they drove through the brightly lit city, he couldn't help but be overwhelmed. The towering buildings, the glowing campuses of tech giants, the hum of ideas buzzing louder than the cars on the road. It was a world he had once aspired to but never touched. The car pulled into a large campus, with tall glass buildings and neatly trimmed trees. The driver stopped in front of a modest-looking guest house tucked beside a garden filled with white roses. "Mr. Pichai arranged for you to rest here tonight," the driver said. "He'll see you tomorrow morning." As Manoj stepped out, his knees felt weak. Not from the journey, but from the sheer weight of the moment. This wasn't just a trip. It was a return. Not to a place, but to a part of himself he thought was lost. He didn't sleep much that night. He lay on the bed in the elegant room, tracing the ceiling with his eyes, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Would Sundar offer him a small consulting gig as a courtesy? Was this a polite gesture of repayment? Or was there something more? He finally opened the folded paper Nia had given him. It was a note written in her careful handwriting. "Dear Papa, you always told me to believe in people even when they stopped believing in themselves. Maybe now it's your turn to believe in you. You're not forgotten. Love, Nia." The words blurred as tears welled in his eyes. He folded the note again and placed it over his heart before finally closing his eyes. Morning came with soft sunlight, streaming through the blinds and a gentle knock at the door. "Mr. Pradhan," said a voice. "Mr. Pichai is ready for you." Manoj straightened his blazer, adjusted the knot of his tie, and followed the young staffer through the polished hallways of Google's executive wing. Every wall held a piece of innovation. Screens floated images of global impact AI, sustainability, community development. He felt small walking through those corridors, a man from another time entering a world where the future already lived. The staffer led him to a quiet corner of the building where a single wooden door stood open. Inside, Sundar sat at a long table, dressed in his usual understated style gray sweater, jeans, and a calm expression that masked a mind always working. He looked up and smiled. "Welcome, Manoj." "Come in." Manoj stepped inside, unsure whether to offer a handshake or a bow. Sundar stood and approached, shaking his hand firmly with both of his. "Thank you for coming," Sundar said. "How was your flight?" "Smooth." Everything was. More than generous. I'm glad. They sat across from each other. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of air conditioning. There were no assistants, no cameras. Just two men from the same country, from the same street, meeting again under entirely different skies. You're probably wondering why you're here, Sundar said. OJ nodded. Yes, though I'm grateful regardless. Sundar leaned forward. What I remember most about our first meeting wasn't that you rejected me. It was how confident you were in your system, how precise, how professional. I used to admire that. You made decisions quickly, based on patterns and data. I wanted to be like that. I built a lot of what I am using that same approach. Manoj blinked, surprised. But now, Sundar continued, I believe the world needs more than patterns. It needs people who've seen both sides. People who've risen, fallen, and risen again. People who remember what it means to be human inside all this code. He pulled a folder from his bag and slid it across the table. Manoj opened it with shaky hands. This, Sundar said, is a project close to my heart. It's called Second Circle. We're creating a global platform to hire, retrain, and integrate senior professionals who were left behind by the digital age. We want to match their experience with today's innovation. It's not charity, it's recovery. It's dignity. Manoj read through the first few pages, eyes scanning words like mentorship pipeline, knowledge transfer zones, and reverse apprenticeship models. We need someone who understands hiring, someone who understands both traditional systems and what they lack, someone who isn't afraid to admit they've made mistakes, because they'll have compassion for those who've also been left behind. He looked at Manoj, not with pity, but with belief. I want you to lead it. Manoj's breath caught. Me? Yes, you. But Sundar ... Why? Because once I asked you for a job, and you said no. But that moment built me. It made me fight harder. Now, I'm saying yes to you. Not because of the past, but because you still have something the world needs. Something I can't teach in a course or automate with AI. Manoj sat in silence, the folder in his lap, the weight of his life being rewritten in front of him. It wasn't a second chance, It was something rarer, a restoration. Will you do it? Sundar asked. Manoj swallowed the lump in his throat. I will. A few hours later, as he stood looking out the glass window at the sprawling Google campus below, Manoj realized something. This place didn't need him to be young or brilliant. It needed him to be human, to bring all the scars, lessons, and quiet wisdom that came from living through the storm. And for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to build again. The resistance within Manoj Pradhan's first week at Google felt like walking barefoot across a sea of glass, painful, reflective, but impossible to ignore. He moved through sleek offices filled with bold colors and young minds, where ideas bounced off whiteboards faster than he could process them. These were people who thought in code, lived in data, and spoke in acronyms. He, on the other hand, still scribbled in notebooks and paused to think before speaking. The gap wasn't just technological, it was generational, cultural, even spiritual. Yet, Sundar had trusted him to lead the Second Circle initiative. He had been given a small team, a generous budget, and a clear goal: bring wisdom back into the workforce. Manoj spent his early days interviewing displaced professionals. Brilliant. People discarded by a system obsessed with youth. Engineers who once built satellites now drove Ubers. Economists with Ivy League degrees worked cash registers. Their stories shattered him. He listened to each one, taking notes in longhand, eyes focused, heart aching. But not everyone, and the company was rooting for him. A quiet resistance had begun to form. It started with cold shoulders during meetings. Then unexplained delays in project approvals. Emails went unanswered. Invites were accidentally missed. And then came the whispers, subtle, cutting remarks spoken just loud enough for him to hear. They brought in a fossil to run a program for fossils. Who's going to listen to a man who doesn't even use Slack properly? Guess This is what diversity looks like now. Hire the people we laid off 20 years ago. At first, Manoj tried to brush it off. He focused on the work, not the noise. He built proposals, presented case studies, and reached out to leaders in other departments to form alliances. But the deeper he went, the clearer it became there were people who didn't want this program to succeed. One of them was Rohit Mehta. Ambitious and sharp-tongued, Rohit was the head of operations for innovation onboarding, a department that directly overlapped with Second Circle's objectives. He had built his career by streamlining hiring pipelines and believed strongly in algorithmic recruitment. He didn't think experience mattered if it couldn't be measured in gigabytes or dashboards. To him, Manoj represented a regression, a threat to the efficiency he had polished like a badge of honor. I didn't confront Manoj openly. Instead, he used bureaucracy like a scalpel. He redirected resources, rerouted approvals, and sent curt feedback that undercut Manoj's proposals without ever violating protocol. Manoj noticed it all, but said nothing. He had lived long enough to understand the power of silence. Still, the walls were closing in. One evening, after another exhausting meeting where his presentation had been politely dismissed, Manoj stood alone in the hallway outside the elevator. The office lights dimmed automatically after hours, and he could see his reflection in the black glass, shoulders slouched, eyes heavy, Kai slightly crooked. He barely recognized the man staring back at him. He turned when he heard a voice behind him. "You're still here?" It was Maya, Sundar's assistant. She had stayed late to finish some files and noticed the flickering lights in the conference room. "Just wrapping up," Manoj said, forcing a smile. "They're not making it easy for you." She replied. He didn't answer. "I've seen this before," Maya said. A few years ago, Sundar brought in a civil rights leader to consult on ethics in high. Some people fought it hard. They pretended to be polite, but they didn't want to change. Not really. What happened? He left within 6 months. Manoj looked away. Maybe they were right. Maybe we don't belong in a place like this anymore. Maya walked closer, her voice softer now. "No. That's the lie they want you to believe. But I've read your reports. I've seen the faces of the people you've interviewed. This matters." He nodded slowly. "Does Sundar know what's happening?" "Of course," she said. "But he believes in solving problems from within. He doesn't want to command people to change. He wants them to choose it." Manoj exhaled deeply. "That's harder, but more permanent." She handed him a tablet. "Check this. One of the prototype ideas you proposed, we ran it in a small test group last week. It's working. Better than expected." He scanned the numbers. The data showed improvement in retention, employee satisfaction, and even innovation metrics. Something real was happening, and that was the threat. If Second Circle worked, it would challenge the foundations of how talent was seen and treated. Later that night, Manoj sat in his temporary apartment and opened a folder filled with printed comments from his interviews. He read one line over and over. Written by a former systems architect named Ramya. "When you're no longer young, people stop asking what you know. They only ask why you're still here." Those words burned into him. He thought of Neha, of the sacrifices she made, of the notes she had written. He thought of Sundar's calm voice and steady gaze, and he made a decision. He would not quit. The next morning, Manoj walked into the weekly strategy meeting with renewed fire. Rohit was there, sitting with his usual smug expression. But this time, Manoj didn't just present numbers. He told stories. He showed video clips of the professionals they had interviewed, doctors, engineers, designers, each one speaking not just about their work, but about being seen again. He used data, yes, but also emotion. He turned the boardroom into a theater of truth. At the end of the presentation, the room was silent. Then, a young software lead named Layla raised her hand. "How can we help scale this?" She asked. Others followed. Within 15 minutes, the room had shifted. Not because Manoj had argued louder, but because he had reminded them of something they had forgotten. That people no matter their age or background, still had value. After the meeting, Rohit stopped Manoj in the hallway. "Nice presentation," he said, voice tight. "But this doesn't change the fact that we can't measure passion in spreadsheets." "You're right," Manoj replied calmly. "But we can measure what it produces, and we just did." He walked away before Rohit could answer. Outside, the California sky was a bright blue. Manoj stood under it for a moment, feeling something lift inside him. Vindication? Not quite. It was the beginning of respect. But just as the winds seemed to shift, something darker stirred beneath the surface. 2 days later, Sundar called Manoj into his office. His face was serious. "There's something you need to see," Sundar said. He slid a document across the desk. A whistleblower complaint. Anonymous. Accusing. Second circle of inflating data. Manufacturing interviews and pushing a personal agenda to secure budget expansion. Manoj stared at it. Stunned. Double quotes. This. "This is false." "I believe you," Sundar said. "But the board wants an internal review. Effective immediately. Your project is frozen." Manoj's fingers gripped the edge of the table. "Someone is trying to kill this." "Yes," Sundar said quietly. "And we need to find out who." Under the surface heat, silence in Sundar's office felt heavier than any storm. Manoj stared at the printed complaint on the desk, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. Each word was like a slap. Fabricated data, unauthorized interviews, biased strategy, misleading reports. Every accusation carefully designed to discredit Second Circle and, by extension, him. He looked up, his voice slow and almost breaking. "Someone wants this to go away. Badly." Sundar leaned back in his chair, eyes locked onto Manoj. "Yes, and whoever it is, they know exactly where to hit, not with noise but precision." This wasn't written emotion. It was written strategy. "Do we know who filed it?" "No name. Anonymous whistleblower." "But the language, the way it's phrased, it sounds like someone from inside your vicinity, possibly your team." Asterisk. Manoj's chest tightened. The thought that someone he had worked alongside, someone he had tried to lead and trust, could turn against him, it made his stomach twist. He had spent weeks rebuilding himself, brick by brick. And now it felt like someone had struck at the very foundation just as it was becoming stable again. "The board has called for a full internal audit," Sundar continued. Compliance, ethics, everything. Second Circle is officially paused until further notice. All data gathering, interviews, outreach frozen. Manoj swallowed hard. "So it's over?" "No," Sundar said firmly. "Not yet. But it's going to get harder now." Later that evening, Manoj sat alone in his apartment, the sun sinking outside, like a slow goodbye. The folder he had once clutched with pride now lay open on the floor, its pages scattered like fallen leaves. Every quote, every story, every hard-won connection now in question. The worst part wasn't the insult. It was the idea that all those people, the forgotten engineers, the retired educators, the unemployed veterans might once again be erased because of a lie. His phone buzzed out a message from Maya. "I believe you. Don't stop now." He read it. Again and again. It was like a single flame in the dark. He stood up and began pacing, his mind racing. If someone inside the system had planted this, it meant they were afraid. Afraid of the truth Second Circle was uncovering. Afraid of the structure changing, and fear made people reckless. That was his opening. The next morning, Manoj returned to the office, not through the executive entrance, but through the public side. Dressed in a plain shirt, no badge, no laptop. He sat in the open cafeteria with a pen and notepad, watching. Not hiding. Not sneaking. Observing. He saw which employees looked him in the eye. Who avoided him, who whispered when he walked past. He began making a list. Not of suspects, but of reactions. People didn't need to say anything. Their energy revealed everything. He met with Layla in private that afternoon. She had been one of the few to openly support the pilot project. "Layla," he asked carefully, "did anyone from my team seem uncomfortable after the pilot results came out. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. One guy. Ajay. The intern. Ajay? Manoj frowned. He barely spoke in meetings. Exactly. But a week ago, I saw him coming out of Rohit's office. He looked shaken. Then he stopped coming to stand-ups. Next day, the complaint lands. Manoj felt a chill creep up his spine. Rohit Mehta. He had suspected it all along, but without proof, it meant nothing. Can you get Ajay to talk? He won't open up to me, but maybe to you. If you don't come at him like a boss, maybe ... like a mentor. Manoj decided to try. He found Ajay later that day in the outdoor garden area, hunched over his laptop, headphones in, tapping nervously on the keyboard. Manoj sat beside him without a word. After a few minutes, he said quietly, You know, when I was your age, I had a manager who told me I wasn't worth training. It nearly broke me. Ajay looked up slowly, surprise flickering in his eyes. But I wasn't angry at him. Manoj continued. I was angry at the way the system worked. It made people believe there wasn't enough for everyone, that the only way to grow was to push someone else out. Ajay took off his headphones. Why are you telling me this? Because someone here is doing that to me now, and maybe ... just maybe, you know something? Ajay hesitated. Then his shoulders dropped. I didn't mean to get involved, he whispered. I just wanted to learn. Involved how? Ajay looked around, voice low. Rohit asked me to pull internal data from your program. He said it was part of a cross-department review. He made it sound official. But then he asked me to edit the output, remove certain metrics, twist others. I didn't know what he was going to use it for. Manoj closed his eyes. And the complaint? Ajay nodded miserably. He said if I didn't format it, he'd block me from full-time conversion. A silence hung between them, broken only by the soft wind rustling the trees. Ajay, Manoj said slowly, you made a mistake, but you can still make it right. How? Help me build a timeline. Show me what was edited, what was changed, and where it originated. But if I do, he'll come after me? No, Manoj said. I will stand in front of you. I promise. They shook hands. It wasn't a handshake of power. It was a handshake of redemption. Over the next 48 hours, Manoj and Ajay worked in secret. They pulled audit trails, timestamps, access logs. They used the very system that had been weaponized against them to expose the truth. Maya joined them late into the second night, quietly slipping them clearance codes. Layla helped too, digging through archived versions of the pilot results. Piece by piece, they built a digital trail. By the third morning, they had it. Emails, edits, overwritten log pointing back to ROA Taitat, and with Sundar's quiet blessing, Manoj walked into the board meeting and laid it all bare. He didn't shout. He didn't gloat. He just told the truth. About second circle, about the lie. About the need to stop seeing experience as a threat and start seeing it as an asset. When he finished, the room was silent. Then one of the board members, an elderly woman with years etched into her face, leaned forward. Thank you, Mr. Pradhan, she said. We needed to hear this. A day later, the complaint was dismissed. Second circle was reinstated. ROHIT meta was removed pending an ethics investigation. And for the first time since he had landed in California, Manoj felt not just seen, but heard. But as the dust began to settle, Sundar approached him quietly in the hallway. You did well, he said. But there's something I haven't told you. Manoj looked at him, puzzled. Next month, Sundar said slowly, you're going to meet someone from your past. Someone you never thought you'd see again. Manoj frowned. Who? Sundar smiled faintly. You'll know when the time. Comey's. Asterisk full circle of days that followed the reinstatement of second circle felt like the first breath after being underwater too long. Sharp, cleansing, and a little painful. Manoj Pradhan resumed work with a quiet strength. He didn't speak much about the complaint or Rohit's removal, The team knew. The walls had ears, and by now even the plants in the lobby probably knew the story. But Manoj didn't come back for applause. He came back for something deeper redemption, not just for himself, but for an entire generation of people who had been quietly cast aside. The Second Circle initiative gained traction faster than anyone expected. Videos of former industry experts returning to train fresh grads went viral on internal platforms. Employees began signing up in droves to shadow retirees who designed systems before the cloud was even a concept. Laughter echoed in breakout rooms, where 22-year-olds asked 60-year-olds how they ever survived without Wi-Fi. Wisdom flowed, not from machines, but from lived experience. It wasn't just integration. It was healing. And through it all, Manoj watched with a cautious heart. He knew better than to expect stability. Life had taught him that just when you think the ground is firm, a storm comes. But what Sundar said that day never left his mind. You're going to meet someone from your past. He didn't know what to make of it. At first, he thought it might be a former colleague, or maybe someone he once mentored. He even wondered if it might be an old friend, someone who had watched him fall. But nothing could prepare him for who actually walked into that room. It happened on a Monday. Had just wrapped up a session with a group of early employees from Google's new India accelerator. He was in the hallway sipping tea when Maya approached. There's someone waiting in your office, she said. Eyes unreadable. Sundar asked me to bring her in personally. Her? Mia only nodded. Manoj walked down the corridor, every step heavier than the last. His hand hovered on the door handle before finally pushing it open. The room was quiet. And in the chair across his desk sat Anita. His first employee. His first hire. 30-3 years ago, when he was just beginning his career at Burrit Systems. Manoj had taken a chance on a young woman fresh out of college who no one wanted to interview because she wore thick glasses, spoke softly, and from a small town most recruiters couldn't even pronounce. She had walked in wearing sandals, carrying a second-hand folder and dreams too big for the room, and he had hired her, against everyone's advice. Anita had grown quickly smart, disciplined, a quiet storm. But when budget cuts came, she had been let go in a wave of downsizing Manoj could not stop. She left quietly, leaving only a thank you note on his desk. They never spoke again. Until now. Sir, she said, rising from the chair. Manoj stood frozen. His voice caught in his throat. Anita. Is it really ? It's me, she said, smiling. The years had softened her face, added a few lines, but her eyes were still the same, curious, fierce, warm. She wore a cream sari with a modern edge, and her lanyard bore the logo of a Silicon Valley consultancy group. How are you here? I've been working quietly. In fintech, at data architecture. I was part of a think tank that collaborated with Google last year. Sundar noticed my work and reached out. When he learned about my past, he thought it was time we met again. Manoj sat down, overwhelmed. I thought I'd never see you again, he whispered. Me too, she replied gently. But the world has a strange way of circling back. They spoke for hours. Anita told him how after being laid off, she had struggled first with confidence, then with survival. For months, she worked temp jobs. No one took her seriously. Eventually, she got into data science through a government program. Years later, she built a reputation consulting for mid-sized firms trying to modernize legacy systems. Every time I solved a problem, she said, I heard your voice in my head. Don't be afraid to speak up, Anita. Even if your voice shakes. You said that to me the first week I joined. Manoj's eyes filled. I remember. You were terrified of client meetings. And now I run them? They laughed, the kind of laughter that holds grief and joy in equal measure. But then her face grew serious. Double quotes, sir. I didn't just come to say thank you. He looked at her. I want to join Second Circle. His eyes widened. You?